Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's webinar. I'm Paul from Foundations.
The Foundations webinar.
And if you haven't heard of Foundations before, we're the national body for home improvement agencies in England. So we work with agencies and local authorities right across the country, and we're here to help. So we do free help, free training, events, workshops, and you can find out more.
Find out more at foundations.uk.com.
And today's agenda is all about housing and dementia. So I will hand over to Francis in a few moments to introduce each section of today's event.
Poll time. Let's see what you think.
But just before we do that, as usual, what's your job and where are you watching from? We'll launch the poll now for you. If it doesn't pop up, then you may have a pop-up blocker on your browser that you just need to adjust. So if it hasn't appeared for you, pop your answer in the chat box. If you're watching on Facebook, put your answer in the messages, and we'll see where everyone's from today and where you're watching from. Share the results. So OT's in the lead this week with a surprising number of others. So if you're another, please pop it in the chat box. Be good to know. Be good to know your background. And let's have a look. Most people are watching from the home office or the dining table. Just 10 of you are in work, and nobody in bed or in the car this week. So it's good to know. Good to know. I've already popped this in the chat box, but this time next week we'll have the National Healthy Housing Awards, and next Tuesday morning we'll have a virtual DFG Champions Roadshow, which includes sessions on latest research, so the Bath Out Project, looking at how well-being is affected or impacted by delays in level access showers. There's some more research from Leeds Beckett University looking at delays in the DFG process. And then a third report from London City University looking at the impact on professionals when roles change. So that was around introducing trusted assessors into a local authority. And then we've got a second session on getting adapting again. So some tips and tricks on how to do virtual assessments from both the council and the service user perspective. We'll have a session looking at OT waiting lists, and then some good practice from a local authority that have, despite the pandemic, have spent all their budget for this year and would love the Chancellor to announce some more money during the spending review tomorrow. So that's all next week, and it's all on a system called AirMeet. So Dan's just put the link in the chat box, and Dan's around in the chat box as well. So if you have any problems with registering, message Dan, he'll sort you out. Be good to see you all next week.
And now it's time for the guest.
So I'll hand over to Francis to introduce the first session from Yasmin Hussain, who's one of our research associates at Foundations.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. First of all, let me put one thing straight. This set of webinars grew out of the abandoned conference on dementia and housing we were going to put on about 2 weeks ago, which was driven forward by Housing 21 and the Dementia and Housing Working Group. We were looking really forward to it, but the tech proved really insurmountable to people with dementia, so we had to abandon it. Didn't want to abandon the content which we generated for the event. So the series of webinars, and there'll be 4 of them through December and January, are designed to actually showcase some of that. And today's content is largely concerned with adapting and refurbishing existing stock. That is existing stock where people already live, that is where people own their own homes, but also existing stock in RSL, and Heidi Fisher will talk about that later on from Housing 21. as always, the expertise of the audience is much greater than the expertise at the on stage. So we really would encourage you to ask questions. I will try and get those to the speakers. The speakers have been briefed to keep it to 20 minutes so that some questions and answers can be fielded. So I'd like to hand it over to Yasmin. Yasmin did some work for us as an intern and is now a policy executive. She's been looking at all the published housing assistance policies, local authorities, and seeing what is available to people living with dementia under those policies. It's all yours.
Thank you, Francis. So, hi everyone. My name is Yasmin, and today I'm going to be telling you about my summer internship work with foundations. My internship task was to identify housing-related support for people with dementia and their carers. So I wrote a report about it, and today I'll be sharing the process and findings of this with you. Ooh, if the tech works. There we go. So firstly, I wanted to provide you with a list of people that helped me with my research. I wanted to say thanks to all of you for all of your help, but a special huge thank you to Francis, as without your help, this project would not have been possible, and the report would probably have been about 600 pages long. So on to the actual context of my research. As a strong advocate for critical research, I think it's important to demonstrate a degree of self-reflexivity from the start of this presentation. The overarching theme of this report is inclusion, whether it be including people with dementia and their families and carers within research or policy. Inclusion is what I will be largely focusing on today. Therefore, it may seem a bit hypocritical of me to stand here criticising housing authorities for failing to include people with dementia when my report did not specifically interview people with dementia. However, as the coronavirus situation made it virtually impossible to meet up face-to-face with someone with dementia, I built on other sources, as I will explain later, to balance this and include perspectives of people with dementia as much as possible. Reflecting on this is important to me because it parallels the conclusion at the heart of my report, which is that the inclusion of dementia voices is largely a bottom-up process. Whether this bottom represents voluntary organisations, occupational therapists, or actual people with dementia and their families and carers, there is a clear absence of dementia voices from top levels of policy, and this has consolidated housing policy as being one size fits all and ultimately exclusionary. So I'm now going to go over the process and findings of my research. Firstly, I conducted a literature search to gauge the current dementia-based approaches to housing. This introduced me to the first dimension of exclusion for people with dementia, their physical exclusion from mainstream housing in the form of care homes. To explain, as 80% of people in care homes have dementia or severe cognitive impairments, and the COVID-19 lockdown resulted in mass deaths of people in care homes and their isolation from society, people with dementia have been disproportionately impacted by the events of this year. The shockingly high deaths of care home residents this year compared to 2019 confirms that securing suitable housing for people with dementia has never been more critical. The physical exclusion of people with dementia from appropriate housing is not because of their personal preference. In fact, 85% of people in the UK would prefer to remain in their own homes if diagnosed with dementia. To put it bluntly, the numbers of people with dementia are rising, and current housing approaches are not sufficiently meeting their preference to stay in their home for as long as possible. This is not only because the housing is unsuitable, but also because more than half of people with dementia aren't being made aware as to how they can safely remain in their homes. Physical exclusion from housing services was not the only form of exclusion which emerged from this literature search, as it also discussed social exclusion. The experiences of people with dementia from minority communities, such as LGBTQ+ and BAME communities, are notably more challenging than white or heteronormative experiences. Before I go any further with this, I'd just like to explain that BAME stands for Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, and LGBTQ+ for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and others. Individuals from these communities already face stigma as a result of being from these minority communities, but on top of this, both communities uphold certain stigmas towards dementia, whereby people with dementia from these communities are often treated differently because of their dementia. Subsequently, these individuals have challenging experiences with dementia, both as a consequence of their dementia and due to their positions of a member of this minority group. More work is needed to ensure that individuals from these groups are able to access appropriate housing. So, for people with dementia to remain at home for as long as possible, authorities must provide adaptations to provide people with dementia through existing housing grants, namely the Disabled Facilities Grant. Therefore, I looked at how the Disabled Facilities Grant was currently being used by local governments. The chart on the slide shows DFG data from 2016 to 2017, and it found that only 3% of the national DFG goes to people whose primary disability is dementia. However, people living with dementia who are over 65 have on average 4 comorbidities. Therefore, whilst people with dementia are probably being included in the distribution of the DFG, their dementia specifically is not. Next, I turn to the housing assistance policies of local authorities. This was to provide a national picture of how many local authorities literally included dementia and their LGBTQ+ and BAME demographics within their housing policies. 279 local authorities in England had a published housing assistance policy, and of these, only 41 housing authorities had a specific policy for people with dementia. When looking for their inclusion of BAME considerations, I found that 91% of the available 279 local housing assistance policies failed to mention BAME considerations at all. The graph on the slide demonstrates that the remaining 9% included BAME considerations, most often by providing translated information or stating a commitment to equality and diversity. As this graph shows, this statement to committing to equality and diversity also appeared most prominently in the housing policy's inclusion of LGBTQ+ considerations. Interestingly, I came across a good few housing policies which stated a clear commitment to gender and sexual orientation, but failed to mention ethnicity or culture at all. So this made me question how committed to widespread equality this statement actually was. Additionally, only 15% of housing assistance policies mention LGBTQ+ communities. These word searches confirmed that physical exclusion from both dementia and minority groups from the housing policies themselves. Next, to understand how the administration of the DFG was functioning practically to include people with dementia, I sent out 2 surveys. One was to the local authorities and the other to occupational therapists. These surveys yielded 60 and 20 responses, respectively. Housing authorities were asked if and how they fitted dementia-specific adaptations. 79% of respondents confirmed that they adjusted adaptations specifically for dementia. The results of how they adjusted these designs is presented on the slide. As you can see, housing authorities mainly adjust these designs through flooring and tonal contrast adaptations. Interestingly, this did not align with the occupational therapist's beliefs as to which designs were most important for people with dementia. Where housing authorities prioritised altering the physical fabric of the home, occupational therapists pointed out that small, simple adaptations can make just as much of a difference to people with dementia as the larger and more expensive ones. This difference demonstrates that the expert knowledge of occupational therapists is not being included within the drafting of these policies, reflecting again an important dimension of exclusion within dementia policies. Housing authorities and occupational therapists were also asked about their training and consultation regarding people with dementia. Housing authorities often claimed that dementia-friend training was as far as their training went. As an initiative intended to inform the general public about how dementia affects a person, dementia-friend sessions are intended to raise awareness and not for training. When asked the same question, 67% of occupational therapists claim that they could have more dementia-based training. Additionally, 75% of housing authorities stated that they had not specifically consulted people with dementia in the drafting of their local housing assistance policies. Essentially, individuals with dementia are not being adequately included in either the creation or the implementation of these housing assistance policies. Next, Startling insight templates were sent to 11 local authorities in order to gain more detailed information about their utilisation of the Disabled Facilities Grant and how it includes people with dementia. The main themes which came out of these are on the slide. So firstly, regarding seeing people on time, the best practice here involved local authorities seeing people as early as possible and providing more accessible information. This included sending information bulletins to professionals and providing dementia-based information in hospitals. Finally, it included creating new roles to transfer some of the workload of occupational therapists. Areas which stood out here were South Oxfordshire, Oxford City, and the Lightbelb project across Leicestershire. A number of local authorities stressed the importance of working with a range of stakeholders to create dementia-friendly grants. By involving residents and dementia support groups, these policies better included the individual needs of people with dementia. Areas such as Brighton and Hove, Rochdale, and South Oxfordshire all had dementia-specific grants of up to £2,500. Other local authorities, such as Oxford City and Middlesbrough, included dementia needs within other minor works grants. Providing more dementia-inclusive staff training involved ensuring that staff and stakeholders were more aware of local housing solutions available to people with dementia. North Somerset, Oxford City, Middlesbrough and Walsall were all proactively expanding their staff training and awareness relational to dementia. Finally, South Oxfordshire, Stevenage and South Lakeland contributed to creating sustainable dementia-inclusive policies by producing feedback statements from advisors from local dementia groups, conducting dementia-inclusive research, and producing video instalments of customer feedback. The next step of my research involved gauging the lived experiences of dementia more personally. I utilised Wendy Mitchell's incredibly powerful Dementia Diaries to do this. For those of you who may not know, Dementia Diaries are a collection of audio diaries produced by people with dementia. Wendy Mitchell's entries touched on some of the key themes of my research, as she makes clear her views on what the right housing means to her. She includes adaptations such as stickers on cupboards, on cupboard doors, painting borders on light switches, and adding labels to hot and cold taps on the shower. All of these are, as she describes, simple, cheap solutions in the house. Interestingly, this preference towards smaller adaptations aligns with the adaptations ranked as most important by the occupational therapists in the survey. Clearly, small adaptations make a big difference when living independently with dementia. After gauging the general housing preferences for people with dementia, I then wanted to understand further how these preferences would differ for different individuals. As I had found, the housing assistance policies hardly mention cultural differences, so to understand these further, I interviewed David Truswell, an experienced writer and speaker on dementia and its impacts on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in the UK. He noted how gaps within the DFG process regarding baby considerations represent fragmentation which undermines the entire process. Therefore, the entire process must be culturally informed and consider individual needs. On the slide, there are some suggestions as to how services and housing adaptations can be more customer-centric and culturally sensitive. A similar theme emerged from my interview with Claire Days, which focused on LGBTQ+ experiences with dementia. She highlighted how a broader spectrum of individual needs must be included for services to be truly client-centred. Claire Days is the programme coordinator for Bring Dementia Out, which is an awareness-raising programme that provides support for LGBTQ+ people with dementia. It involves training and an e-learning course for dementia housing and care organisations on how to ensure inclusivity for LGBTQ+ service users. Claire Days maintained that specific efforts were needed to minimise the exclusion of LGBTQ+ people with dementia. This involved having LGBTQ+ inclusive housing adaptations through providing a range of gendered options, which are presented on the slide. Both David and Claire noted how health and housing authorities often employ racial, ethnic and gendered assumptions when treating people with dementia. In doing so, these authorities create an impersonal experience for the customer. For the process to be thoroughly customer-centric, individual needs must be included throughout. Embarking on training about these minority groups and their experiences with dementia is an obvious suggestion. However, as this slide shows, other efforts to increase awareness within services are even more straightforward and may make a huge difference. LGBTQ+ and BAME inclusive approaches will involve housing and health authorities feeling more comfortable with openly asking questions on a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, improving these services for these groups will result in better services for all. Finally, I conducted an interview with an occupational therapist who also had personal experience as an informal carer for her father with dementia. Like other occupational therapists and Wendy Mitchell, she noted the importance of simple and cheaper adaptations. However, what truly struck me here was the dimension of inclusion which came out of it. This was including the families and carers in the process. The occupational therapist highlighted how emotionally challenging the experience can be for both the person with dementia and their families and carers. She spoke about the need for more robust and systematic support systems by health and housing authorities as early as possible. I'm now going to go over some of my conclusions and briefly state some of my recommendations. So my first conclusion is that housing policy should embark on a social model of disability to respond in nuanced ways to individual experiences. Secondly, I have concluded that recent events combined with an evolving national picture on dementia and diversity all call for urgent policy action. I recommend that health and housing authorities work to move group meetings for people with dementia online. Also, adaptations to reduce feelings of isolation through technology-enabled care should be included in policy. Thirdly, I have concluded that individual experiences of people with dementia from minority groups must be better accommodated in policy. Housing authorities are recommended to regularly consult with people with dementia and their families and carers about their DFG designs and their personal experiences. Fourthly, I have concluded that published local housing assistance policies do not mention and include dementia, BAME communities or LGBTQ+ communities sufficiently enough. Therefore, all local housing authorities should take a more inclusive approach to their housing assistance policy. My fifth conclusion is simply that small is beautiful. My research has drawn out the potential impact of smaller adaptations for both people with dementia and housing authorities. Subsequently, housing authorities should work more closely with recommendations from occupational therapists and consider the importance of simple, subtle, and more personal adaptations. My sixth conclusion is that the workforce delivering the Disabled Facilities Grant experiences a shortage of continuing professional development. It is recommended that training be more widespread, more thorough so that it includes more dementia-specific training and more regular. Additionally, research should be more dementia inclusive and co-produced with individuals from BAME and LGBTQ+ communities. My seventh conclusion is that effective local housing policies which truly address the needs of people living with dementia and their families and carers will engage people early about the available services and adaptations. It is advised that information be publicly available and be made more accessible. Lastly, and arguably most importantly, the best housing assistance policies involve people with dementia in meaningful ways. If policymakers can successfully co-produce services with the most vulnerable, all services will improve. Fundamentally, my research has drawn out that whilst good practice exists, there is enormous scope for improvement across the board. For the system to work better for all, authorities should produce services which are truly customer-centric by ensuring that those most marginalised become central. Ultimately, all people with dementia and their families and carers must be made more visible within policy and services. Thank you for listening, and I'm here to take any questions. And if anybody would like a copy of the report, please feel free to email me. My email is just on the slide.
So much, Yasmin. I suppose it's the same old story, is that we're looking for personalised solutions and actually that take the lived experience of people into consideration. Is there any questions? If you do have questions, pop it into the chat box, and I'll be able to feed them through to Yasmin. Actually, she will be able to see them herself. So, any questions? Yasmin, I'll have a question. Put you on the spot. Oh, there was one. Why do you feel the need to draw in LGBTQ and BAME considerations in your consideration of dementia? Does it not run the risk of lumping a load of minority interests together in one pot?
So I thought it was important because the whole point of the research was looking at inclusivity and how I can best include people with dementia. And people with dementia aren't just one lump of the same person. Everyone has individual needs. So I think it was important for me, as my research went on, I realised how broad the needs actually were. And I think just responding to those in a single way kind of ignores how different dementia is for everybody and how different everybody is.
Yeah, they use a modern word for it called intersectionality, isn't it? The way we all experience lives in different facets of our lives. It is really interesting because it is that experience is very new. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Yasmin at all? No. Yasmin, thank you so much for addressing us. Some of the people mentioned in her report will actually be addressing the next of these webinars. I know that Dan has popped some stuff into the chat box already, but Wendy will be there. Carers will be there, importantly, to give a view about what the experience of dementia-friendly services is for them. To put some more nuance on the sort of reality of delivering services and adaptations for people with living with dementia. I'm really pleased to welcome Marnie and Shirley. Marnie and Shirley are both OTs. Marnie was co-author of the Adaptations Without Delay report by Arcot and is a member of the specialist section there. We have a lot of OTs today on the call. We think OTs will provide a crucial play a crucial part in delivering those personalised services. And I'm hoping that Marnie will put some flesh on those bones. Thank you, Marnie.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I'm keeping my camera switched off because sometimes I have problems with signal. But we're both here, Marnie. I'm Marnie and Shirley's here. We're here to talk about how occupational therapists can work to support people with dementia, to support well-being. And my experience comes from working with people with all kinds of different conditions in their own homes, using equipment and adaptations to support independence. From that, I now specialise in advising in the design of housing for older people. So I've learnt a lot about how design can support independence for people living with dementia in terms of the general principles that apply to public spaces and housing with care environments. But what really interests me now is how we can apply this knowledge to support individuals in specific situations.
Hi, I'm Shirley Pearce, and I train family carers and professionals for the charity Understanding Dementia. And as an independent OT, I've worked closely with people with dementia. I've even had the privilege of staying overnight in clients' houses as part of an in-depth assessment into not only their needs in that environment, but also their abilities, their daily routines, and their coping strategies. Marnie.
So Shirley and I have been sharing our knowledge and experience of what works well and why. And today we're going to talk about the value of the occupational therapy approach in working with people living with dementia, our understanding of how dementia impacts on well-being, and how to include the person in the process when we might be making changes to their homes. We're going to look at some issues and some simple design solutions, and how you can use the principle of visual access to support orientation and continuing engagement in everyday activities. You might come across OTs in any setting: primary care, hospitals, housing, social care, and even in the voluntary sector. And we've realised that not many OTs are confident in understanding the issues and solutions that might be useful for people living with dementia. So what we're interested in is how we can raise awareness of this amongst all OTs, of what kinds of things work, and why?
The occupational therapy approach considers the person, their priorities, aspirations, and needs, their environment, their home, their social environment, family, friends, support networks, and who they share that space with, and occupation in terms of their roles, routines, and habits, everyday tasks, self-care, work, leisure, and personal interests. And this is what it looks like in practice. The person is this lady, the environment is her kitchen at home, and her current occupation is cooking a meal as part of her daily routine and her role within the household. Now, the term well-being is bandied around a lot, and this is what I mean by it. On the left hand of the slide, you have Tom Kitwood's breakdown of the 4 elements of well-being. Self-esteem, it's okay to be me. Autonomy, feeling in control and having some degree of choice. Social confidence, we may not be the life and soul of the party or even want to be, but we do need to feel comfortable around other people. And hope that one way or another things are going to be all right. These feelings are interdependent, so if one is damaged, the others are under threat too. And note that this applies in normal life for all of us, whether or not we have dementia. Now, on the right, you can see the potential breakdown of well-being that dementia can bring. Self-esteem can be knocked when you can't do the things that made you feel good, those occupations that identify you as you. Autonomy when other people take over, and sometimes they have to. Social confidence, fear of showing yourself up in public, can lead to social withdrawal. And hope. Depression is a common symptom in dementia, and it can in turn affect memory. We need to understand that these are all subjective feelings. So, for instance, what looks like autonomy from outside may not always feel like it to the person. I'll give you an example. I worked with a lady with dementia who used to entertain on a grand scale. She was a real hostess with a mostest. So when she and her husband moved into a supported living flat with a tiny kitchen, her cupboards were full of soup tureens, fish kettles, and vast serving dishes she no longer used, together with random pieces from 3 dinner services. But the space was so limited that many of the basic items had been left out. And it's much harder to improvise when your memory isn't working as it should. She'd insisted that they'd been packed to bring, but if I'd been supporting the family during that time, I'd have said she needs to feel she has autonomy. So please don't get rid of the basics until after she's moved. And then you can see what she actually needs. Involving the person is not just a tick box exercise. When someone is already finding it hard to make sense of things, feeling left out can be devastating. But the man on the right doesn't feel involved either. He just feels talked over. And that doesn't help. It's much better to get alongside, observe the person in their situation, learn from them, their priorities, their issues, their abilities, and challenge some of our own assumptions. Literally get alongside. If the person is involved in the process, they're much more likely to understand any changes or adaptations and then use them. While I was preparing for this, I heard of a lady who'd recently had a home assessment, and the well-meaning social services had removed the old kitchen chair she was using for support near the doorway and put a nice new handrail in its place. The family later discovered she wasn't eating properly. It had all become too complicated. That chair had also served as the handy table to put her plate on while she negotiated the step, holding on with both hands. So they found a small table for that purpose, and the problem was solved. Whether you're using a walking aid or a handrail, you will have fewer hands to carry things, and dementia makes it harder to problem solve.
So in terms of designing for dementia in the home, some of the issues experienced by people with dementia, such as orientation, are being addressed by attention to wayfinding and signage in public spaces. But when we're working with people in their own homes, we need to be learning from that individual and the strategies they use to overcome the particular issues that they have. By making some simple changes in your home, people are capable of doing much more than we might assume and might need less assistance. But everyone is different, and what works for one might not work for another. And as Shirley has said, it's about working with each individual to find the solution that suits the situation.
These minimalist kitchens can look great, but they can be impractical for someone with dementia. The husband of the hostess lady I was telling you about liked to make himself useful by putting things away after the washing up, but he was developing dementia too, so it was anyone's guess where anything was. And in another house I visited, the man wanted to make me a cup of tea, but all the cupboards looked identical and he literally didn't know where to start. This was in a purpose-built so-called extra care complex, which was built with people with dementia in mind, apparently. But he ended up needing extra carers because the extra care environment didn't support him to manage independently.
So just by simply keeping some key items in view, you can they can act as triggers to everyday activity. It's not just about being able to find things, it's being reminded what you are looking for in the first place. If all the units have solid fronts, labelling them or using photos on the front of them of the contents can provide simple but effective clues. Glass-fronted cupboards can be used to display just a few key items that you use every day, foodstuffs, crockery or utensils. But even just removing a cupboard door or having an open shelf could serve the same purpose. And if you've got a deeper work surface, you can allow safely to leave more things out at the back of the worktop within reach. You can also use things like see-through containers, a glass jar for tea bags, for example, and you can add hooks under the cupboards to hang mugs or utensils. Simply just a photo of a pint of milk on the fridge door could be a kind of intuitive visual clue to where the fridge is. Equally, effective use of lighting can be a really simple way to support everyday activity and make it easier to find things. And in general, for people living with dementia, twice the level of normal lighting is recommended. Task lighting in the kitchen also makes it safer and avoids the potential for spillages and cuts. And there are a number of now battery-operated bolt-on products you can get now to put in things like cupboards and drawers. We can also think about how lighting is located, for example, next to our favourite chair, which prompts us to perhaps take a break and sit down. Equally, we might think about how we could use lighting to draw attention to items and images that have personal meaning, things that provoke pleasant memories of people and events. And if you are going to start to look at how you can improve the lighting, it's really important that you make sure that it's easy to find the switches and controls. There's not much use improving these things if you can't find the switch, and simply using tonal contrast around the light switch can help. But these touch lamps have been found to be particularly useful because they're so simple and intuitive to use, and particularly helpful at night when you just reach out towards the lamp and the light goes on. You can also use movement activated lights that light your way to the bathroom. And an important issue to remember when you're introducing anything new is the importance of involving that person in the process. Evidence from recent research on introducing some of these simple changes in the home recommends that, for example, walking around the house together and talking about where there are dark places, where it might be useful to improve the lighting, means that the person is more likely to engage with anything new that you introduce.
Contrast makes it easier to locate a doorway, especially useful for the smallest room that you might need in a hurry. If you do use signage on doors, a combination of text and image is often easier to understand than just one of those things. And it helps to use the right word, i.e. the one that they use, taking into account their language, their culture, etc. You can have illuminated clocks in each room, which indicate whether it's AM or PM. And a whiteboard that you might use in the kitchen for shopping lists and so on can also be used as a daily timetable. If you're thinking of using an orientation board, for goodness sake, please make sure that it's kept up to date. I visited a dementia-friendly ward at my local hospital on a bank holiday Monday and was greeted by a board proclaiming, "Today is Friday." I'm not sure how that was supposed to help anyone. But as dementia progresses, reminders can become less useful. When the memory isn't storing facts, those cues that normally work so well may not work at all. If a fact hasn't been stored in our memory, then no amount of cueing will help us retrieve it. It's just not there. And when information is getting more and more patchy because the facts are slipping away, it becomes harder to interpret what's left. So some aids can become counterproductive and cause anxiety. For example, I heard a story of a great lady who was always checking her diary and getting anxious if she couldn't find it. The obvious solution seemed to be to make sure there was always one handy, with a calendar in every room. But her anxiety came from her past. As a great lady, she was always having to go and open a fete or be a guest of honor somewhere, and it wouldn't do to miss it or even be late. As her dementia progressed, the diaries were causing more and more anxiety. But once her carer had sussed that out, a simple, "Oh, what a relief, there's nothing that needs opening today," and she would relax and start talking about those times when she'd been treated like the Queen, and even when she'd met her. Some orientation items are expensive to buy and may or may not be useful to an individual, or may only be useful for a limited time, but you often can't tell until you've tried it with that person. So there would be scope for setting up a local loan service on a similar basis to a toy library.
There's also a lot of evidence now that regular access to outdoors and exposure to natural daylight can help to support natural daily rhythms of waking and sleeping, which can be a significant issue for people living with dementia. And it's also now well known that the views of natural environment have positive effects for all of us in terms of a sense of well-being, but they can also orientate us to the changing seasons. In terms of getting more light from natural light in, you need to be thinking about things like trimming foliage and overhanging trees outside, and if relevant, painting walls outside that might reflect light back into the room. Keeping windows clean and removing nets, but also making sure the curtains are pulled back away from the window frame. And to maximise the light coming through the window, you can think about lengthening the curtain rail. The key thing to help with visual access is paying attention to tonal contrast, but that doesn't mean you have to use bright colours. A darker shade on the walls can make the white sanitary ware stand out, and this also means that if you do need rails, the white rails stand out against a darker wall. A simple, darker contrast toilet seat makes it more recognisable. And unlike some advice you might have seen in the past, this does not need to be read. Similarly, using a tonal contrast to pick out the door frame and the wall can make it easier to locate the doors. It's all about using the contrast as a way to outline the key features that make it easier to find what you need to find. Sometimes people might appear to lose interest in eating. Using colour and contrast can make it easier to see the food on a plate. And there are some simple and attractive ways that you might think about making a meal feel more like an occasion, perhaps making it feel like a cafe or a restaurant, something we've all missed in lockdown, or especially if we've been shielding.
And it really helps if things look like what they are. Trying to use a modern joystick type tap can be confusing, even if you haven't got dementia. Showers with markings subtly etched onto the fittings can be much harder to use once you've taken your glasses off and everything's steamed up. I've had that problems in hotels, but once I've looked at it and tried it out once, I'm usually okay. But if my memory wasn't storing facts reliably, it would be a different story. I stayed with a lady with dementia once who hadn't had a shower for months because it had stopped working, so she said. There was an isolator switch in the hall, but it looked exactly like a light switch. So one night on her way to bed, she turned it off, and that was that, no more shower.
But if we're considering more major changes to the home, for people with dementia, we have to consider the impact that will have on them in making the home feel less familiar. If you need to consider if people are having difficulties getting up, using the stairs or getting in out of the bath, we need to think about, we have to make more careful risk assessments, but we shouldn't be making blanket policies about not installing a stair lift. So in terms of a stair lift, for example, you need to consider things like the ability that person has to learn new skills and follow instructions. You can involve the person in trying out things like stair lifts. You can, in terms of shower adaptations, you can use pictures to explain what's being planned. And when you're installing a stair lift, you have to consider whether there's always going to be someone there to provide support and supervise that person if their needs begin to change. You also got to consider that perhaps installing a stair lift might mean removing a stairwell that's always been there, so it's taking away something that's familiar. And ability to use a stair lift needs to be regularly reviewed, and there's some great advice come out recently by a specialist in cognitive assessments that's useful, that's particularly related to assessments for stair lifts. And in terms of level access showers, which obviously have obvious benefits for making it easier to manage personal hygiene, we need to think about avoiding making significant changes to the layout. So if it's possible to install that shower without moving the position of the WC and the wash basin, the room still feels familiar. It's equally important to consider that installing equipment that might have a clinical appearance may make the person feel like they've just walked into a hospital bathroom and become equally disorientated. At the same time, using tonal contrast, as I've said earlier, to make it easier to see and understand the key features so that they stand out from the background is important. And always involving the person in the process as much as you can, using images and so on to show them what is being planned and possibly involving them in making some of the choices.
So you can see that occupational therapists work with the person in their own environment and identifying any barriers to independence to do the things that make their life worth living, using aids, adaptation, or adaptive techniques. We can support them to manage independently for longer, and then to make any transition into a different physical setting or into accepting more help from others when they need it much smoother by making it feel less alien.
So we've talked about some of the simple solutions that can support well-being, but what works for one person might not work for another, and what's useful will change over time. You might come across an OT in a range of locations. Some of them are specialists in dementia, but many of us aren't. And we're interested in raising awareness of these solutions amongst OTs working in all settings, so that we can all have a role in advising on what people can do for themselves in their own homes. But also for commissioners to consider that some of these smaller items could be standardised on loan for trial via equipment stores, or be funded using existing grants for adaptations. So thank you very much for listening, and let us know if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Hi, Marnie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, jolly good. So the first thing that's come up, and that's partly because we've got quite a large number of OTs in the audience, is that both that Claire, Louise and Carol are all asking, where is the recent guidance or reporting on cognition and stair lifts? Do you have a link? Do you know where that report is?
It's by an OT, a Scottish OT called Ailsa Dow. I came across it recently and I haven't got it to hand, but I can share it with. How could I share it with?
You can pop it into the chat in a minute once you've done your stint. That'd be really helpful. Thanks,
Okay.
Arnie. Any other questions? For me, this is where policy hits practice. It's really interesting to hear Marnie and Shirley talk about the sort of small things that can help and the sort of things that would be useful in ameliorating some of the effects of dementia as it progresses. Simon Evans is on this webinar. He evaluated a specific grant available in Worcestershire, where people were given a non-means tested grant for £750 on the diagnostic pathway. So as soon as they came into the view of primary care services looking at cognitive change, the local authority offered them a dementia-specific grant, non-means tested, and people could choose the things that work for them themselves. And it was really interesting that people weren't after huge adaptations. The average grant was about £138 for about 500 people who used the service. That's one thing. The second thing that struck me was that Marty and Shirley said it'd be really good to have something like a library so people can try some of this stuff, because what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And it put me in mind that the Bristol Assessment Centre has actually got has got a section on dementia where people can try the sort of adaptations and kit that is available to people living with dementia. That's both carers and people diagnosed with dementia. So I thought I'd share that. Is there any other questions? So Paul just put in the chat that there's a dementia library in Leeds too. So these things do exist, and again, this is where policy could play a really helpful role, because what the local authority could do is to actually say in its policy that we will fund a dementia aids and adaptations library or assessment centre, which will then respond to local need. Some of the bigger themes, some of the longer term stuff that comes out of that will no doubt be explored by Heidi. Heidi is the Housing 21, the director at Housing 21, concerned with the existing stock. So some of the long-term solutions for stock that needs to respond flexibly to the needs of people living with dementia, she will have been facing for some time. So the Housing 21 has developed a design guide, and Heidi is going to share some of that. Heidi, can you hear me and share your screen, if you're willing to do that?
Sorry, bear with me. I'm just
That's all right, Heidi. It's the joys of Zoom, I think.
I know, it's because we always use Teams at Housing 21.
I know.
Wonderful. Hi everybody. So thank you
Hi.
for coming along. Hopefully some of what I'm going to tell you will be of interest. It's certainly not quite as technical and detailed as my earlier panel members, so thank you for those. I found them both really interesting. So what I would like to cover today is really our approach to that dementia challenge, and just give some really good examples of some of the good practice that we're following. So we called it kind of where old meets new. I think that kind of sums it up really, that as a challenge for Housing 21, we've got a real mix of stock. We've got our brand new extra care schemes that are actually, you know, purpose built, and we've got our existing schemes that are a bit older. So I wanted to show you this. I think this is a really good example of where we do bridge that gap. So this is Lady Ida Lodge in Cookridge. It's virtually finished. It's going to open early next year. So this is where we've had a grade 2 listed hospital building that we've acquired, and we've actually extended it to create a new extra care scheme. So this has been a really perfect example of where old meets new, actually. So the original building dated back to, I think it was 1868, so it's quite old. So for Housing 21, obviously, is it a blank canvas or a huge challenge? So I guess for us, a new build is quite an easy one, where if you're designing a scheme from scratch, you've got a blank canvas, you don't really have the restrictions, just your imagination. So, you know, as a general rule of thumb, the designs are dementia friendly. They do include a nod to wayfinding, good use of colour and furniture to help that manoeuvre. Our residents tell us that they love the fact that we do that, and it's something that's really fitting to the local area. Innovation and technology, so we're a big fan of digital ward and crawl systems, new lighting, motion spot accessories for our bathrooms, again really just to make them as accessible and practical for our residents. And you know, we haven't forgotten the outside, so actually, you know, we're quite aware of the benefits of the outside space and the well-being that can provide to the schemes, but trying to bring a bit of that indoors, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So that's the lovely kind of, if everything goes well, this is what we tend to deliver, and they're fantastic, they're well received. But actually, as Housing 21, we've got a long history. So what if we don't have that blank canvas? So this is the challenge. Could somebody move my screen on, please? I don't think I've got control of the slides. Thank you. So, okay, so we've got this challenge to bring consistency where old meets new. So a lot of our retirement housing schemes were built in the late 60s and 70s. In fact, most of the stock was built then. So what we have done is we've developed an internal design guide that we apply to all our stock, regardless of whether it's extra care or retirement housing. So basically, to summarise what that is, because it's quite a big document, but it is contemporary design, so really modern fixtures and fittings, absolutely always dementia friendly features. Even if it is a much more independent retirement scheme, we do apply the same principles to our design. We absolutely use, you know, tonal contrast, colour. Having the colour contrast really helps in terms of that overall design, but the overall look and feel of the scheme. The technology, upgrading our components. So Housing 21 has had a really positive approach to investment. So we've had additional funding from our board to uplift our schemes. So we've had the benefit of looking at our component replacements. We've looked at all the fixtures and fittings that go in to try and make them as modern and contemporary as possible, but that they're easy to use for our residents. So that's something that we've been able to achieve. So we're looking at modern kitchens and bathrooms, so no older than 20 years before they get replaced. We've also looked at our energy efficiency, so that's level C, EPC as a minimum, and the design-led makeovers, which I'm responsible for with my team, reviewed every 7 years. So that forms part of our general sort of approach to investment. If we could move to the next slide, please. So this is our design guide. So bringing all of the sort of common factors together around how we approach our design, the principles from it. We got a lot of inspiration and help in terms of good practice from the University of Stirling and Worcester and our residents. So if anybody's out there from there, thank you very much. So if we could turn to the next page, please. So I think this summarises anybody that's my age or older that's familiar with The Prisoner will recognise this slide. So I am not a number. So I think one of the strap lines from The Prisoner is I am a person. And I think when we looked at the design guide, that was something that was very key to us to make sure it wasn't a tick box, that it actually made sense. It applied to people, and we took the people to the heart of kind of what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So this is really it. We won't be institutionalized. So that comes from I'm not a number. So basically throughout our design guide, these are some of the aspects that we've looked at and considered. And we don't want the schemes to be institutionalized. We want them to be dementia friendly, but you can create that without making them look dated and tired. So these are some of the examples of some of the good practice that we apply to our scheme. So coloured door reveals. So again, depending on the layout, but we normally have features around the doors. So I think some of the ladies earlier were talking about that. Individual floor designs, accessories for wayfinding. So we often have rest spaces in the larger schemes with longer corridors and different features that help people identify where they are within that scheme. one design fits all. So actually, like I said earlier, you know, just because it's a retirement scheme, that doesn't mean that we haven't got residents with dementia, because quite often they might have moved in, be fully independent, but then actually as they age and as they wish to remain on the court as long as possible, they do develop dementia. So again, having that approach to the retirement as well as the extra care schemes, I think it helps future-proof them for us. I won't go into lots of detail here, but the light reflectance value. So obviously when we're looking at our designs, we are looking for that 30-point difference in the flooring, in the wall colours and other components and things that we're installing. So again, dementia friendly component replacement. So when we are changing things like the communal kitchens in a makeover in the communal areas, we'll make sure that everything that's going in is as up to date and dementia friendly as possible. And maximising natural light. So again, this was covered earlier, but again, in our design guide, we recognise the benefit of bringing as much natural light and part of the outdoors in. So this is what we're starting to explore more around biophilic design, which I will again come to it in a second. So each makeover is unique. We don't have sort of standard boards that we apply. We literally do each scheme based on engagement with the residents, what it is they would like and need. So every scheme is individual, what the purpose of that room is. If they need something, want something, we will try and accommodate that as much as possible. So this is kind of our approach to the design guide. If we could turn to the next page, please. So nostalgia, so this is a big thing for us. So I've got a couple of images on here of a couple of our schemes just to show you some of the examples of what we apply to our design. So we tend to have murals, we tend to have local artwork that might be a blast from the past or something that people kind of recognise as a local landmark in the area. So actually, I think within every design that we do, we try and have something along these lines, again, depending on space and layout. But yeah, again, extra care or retirement housing, you will see these in our schemes because we've had such fantastic feedback from the residents. It would be wrong of us not to include them. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So this is a really good example of out with the old, in with the new. So going back to my sort of strap line at the beginning, really, which is around how we transform the spaces. So this is a scheme up in the north that one of my designers transformed. So this is the kind of look and feel that we're going for when we are transforming our schemes. And I've got another one to show you on the next slide. So again, this one was massively transformed. This was a scheme in Wolverhampton. So again, this one had a lot of challenges around the layout. So actually we had the benefit on this one of being able to reorganise the communal space. So we did a bit of remodelling as well. But as you can see, it doesn't look anything alike. You can just about tell it's the same one by the ceiling, but we've really tried to make it light and bright and attractive and appealing. So yeah, this is where we're going really. So this is the standard, this is the sort of look and feel of all of our schemes when we're making them over. And you know, the interior designers that work for me work really hard to make sure that they're collaborative, that they are dementia friendly, and that they look amazing as well. So we're really proud of our schemes. If we could move to the next slide, please. So I want to just very briefly talk about what the future looks like for Housing 21. So here's a couple of examples here. So we have a new extra care opening in Fakenham in the spring next year. So this again was in partnership with the local authority and obviously our construction team. So we were able to secure additional funding for this scheme. So unlike the traditional extra cares where usually they tend to have communal space, but it's usually limited to things like communal lounges and restaurants and things like that. This has got dedicated space throughout the whole building to include dementia friendly features. So we have an actual nostalgia room, we've got some breakout areas. So basically this is what the scheme's going to look like when it's finished. So we've got a village store and a post office, and we're going to have lots of items that are going to go in there to really kind of remind people of the local area. We've worked really closely with the local authority as well to look at naming of certain parts of the building. So each wing will have its own street name that relates to the local area. So the local council members put some suggestions forward to us, which we'll be including. We're going to have an indoor potting shed. And we're also going to have some kind of indoor garden spaces. So they're going to have a bit of a look and a feel of an outside space, but indoors. So in some of the lighter, brighter ends of corridors where we've got space to have a bench and some seating areas, some practical other sort of props and things, we're going to make them a really inviting place for people to take a sit and look out the window or whatever they want to do. But the design for this scheme's actually really exciting to me. I can't wait to see the finished result, because I think it's something a little different to what we've done because of this additional space. I think it gives us just that amazing opportunity to really transform it. So this is really one that I'm hoping to show off next year when it's finished, because I think it's going to look absolutely wonderful. If I could go to the next slide, please. So what next for us? So we've transformed the inside of our courts. You know, we've finished in terms of lifting them up to those property standards that I talked about earlier. But the next things for Housing 21 really are going to centre on other elements of where we can add value and we can improve wellbeing for our residents. So I've got some images here just to show you. So the image on the left, this is a new scheme that opened in the summer up in the northeast, and we've tried to capture a bit of the outside but bring it in. So biophilic design is something that we're really taking forward now. So we've kind of recognised the benefits of bringing the outside in, and I think for us as an organisation, with lockdown and with COVID and all the challenges that's brought, I think we've realised that actually our social spaces and garden spaces are so important to our residents. So one of the things that we're looking to develop further is that biophilic design, so bringing the outdoors in. So what I mean by that is certain elements of bringing that outdoors in, whether it could be a living wall, so having some planting and some sensory type plants and features that might provide certainly better acoustic qualities in some of the bigger schemes with bigger lobbies and things like that. We're looking at natural products, so driftwood and things that we might then use to tailor to the design of the scheme. So again, some of our newer schemes, we've got a few that are going to be built on the coast next year. So we've tried to kind of bring some of the local features in with some of the materials that we're using as well. And you know, there's a lot of benefits to that. So maximising light, having these breakout areas, having areas where people can sit and reminisce. So that's something that's going to be quite big for us going forward. And then for our retirement schemes, again, we've realised that as much as the extra cares have absolutely beautiful gardens and surroundings, again, some of the sort of 60s and 70s builds are a little limited in the way the gardens are set up at the moment. So what we will be doing is taking a look at how we can lift the outside spaces to marry up to, you know, how impressive some of the new parts of the building are internally. So these are going to be some of our challenges and where we're going to go with it. So it's quite an exciting time for us, really. I think we've got so many challenges, but so many good ideas about improving the wellbeing for our residents, involving them really with everything that we do. You know, when we consult on designs and choices, it's a fully engaged process. You know, we like to ask people, what do you want? What do you need the space to do for you? So there's an awful lot more there that we're doing. So that's where we're at, really. So last slide. Be seeing you. So again, a little nod to the prisoners. So I think I probably whipped through that quite quickly, actually. So I don't know if there are any questions, but hopefully you found it interesting just to sort of visually see some of the improvements that we're working on or we've done already.
Thank you so much, Heidi. So there was a question about whether you do any post-occupancy evaluations. So I'm not sure. It's not my field, so I'm not sure what that question actually entails. But you might know.
I'm not sure exactly whether that's. I mean, we used to do feedback from residents when they vacated properties or from the family. So we've done that in the past. Actually, when we've done that, it didn't really throw much up. I think in most cases when we had that, it was a case of people were leaving because they absolutely had to. So if it was, say, a resident that had left a retirement housing scheme, it was because they needed probably nursing care or something like that that we couldn't provide for them. But we also do post-work reviews. So when we've done a big project, obviously COVID allowing, because it's put a bit of a break on that at the moment, but we have gone out and as managers within the department that I work in, asset management, we go out and speak to the residents. We gain feedback for all the components, so not just the design based stuff, but where we're putting in kitchens and bathrooms or new ward and call systems. We will sit down with them and say, do you know how it works? You know, show us how it works. What could be done better for next time? So I think, you know, we're really good at trying to learn from what we've done, but engage with residents to get their feedback. I mean, for example, one scheme I went to, I chose something that's totally random to me that I don't know an awful lot about, but the digital ward and call system. And some of the residents said, oh, we missed the training session from the contractors, so we don't really know how to use it. We've stuck post-it notes all over the actual tablet. So I asked them to go back and do another session with the residents. So I think, you know, we're always keen that we don't know it all, but we will try and make things better for people and listen to that feedback.
I think that's the really important lesson for this afternoon. I think that whole thing of engaging people with the places they live in, the actual experience they're having, and the solutions that are out there are just a constant process of engagement. And where policy so often falls down is that we simply make policy without engaging those people. And then we're surprised that the practice doesn't quite work out in the way we expected it. So I'm really pleased that you've been able to set out what is essentially an asset management problem, which is that you have an aging stock and you have a changing tenant body, and then actually you keep that up to date by talking to your tenants and say, what are your needs? What would you like to see? What works for you? Now, funnily enough, that in a funny sort of way, you might have better resources to invest in your stock than a local authority would in the stock of owner occupiers who face exactly the same thing, which is that their old house is no longer suited to their needs and they actually need some sort of refurb to make it work. Very early on in this webinar, I had a question about colour, and actually, do you think that there's been any agreement about the nature of colour in design and dementia, or do you think actually what matters about colour is that the person who lives with it has to live with it, not what we say it should be? So it doesn't always have to be beige.
Well, I think we have an interesting approach to it, actually. So we've had schemes in the past where they've had, and we don't really do this now, but they've had specific dementia wings on the building, and we've got one care home in Walsall. So when we've looked at refurbishments on those ones, we've been very sensitive to not change things up too much. So I think, it's that individual approach, isn't it? I think, you know, you can't sort of say one size fits all necessarily, but I think by speaking to residents and engaging with them, and even during COVID, we've developed a more of a sort of virtual consultation method that still involves everybody, gives them time to think and make choices and ask questions to then involve their family as well. So yeah, I think, you know, we kind of go bold on colour, and we try to do what's best for the residents. We also engage with the staff on site. I think that's also important because they're going to know the residents and maybe some of the difficulties they've got with the current arrangement, or where certain furniture is, or it doesn't meet the bill for those residents. So I think by having that collaborative approach, I think that really covers everything off for us. You know, we can make sure we're not just choosing things for people, we're asking their opinion before we go off and do it.
That's really interesting and actually really helpful. So let me ask you a question that people never ask, which is one about money. Is it budget limited? Is it, when we engage with people, what people worry about in terms of setting policy and then engaging the wishes and desires of residents or owner occupiers, actually, is that actually somebody will soak up whatever available budget there is on schemes that in the end might not work and actually will devalue the property. Is budget a consideration in the choices that people have?
I think for us, actually, the choices and our approach to design doesn't cost any more, really. I think when you talk fixtures and fittings and aids and adaptations, that's a different conversation. But actually, by working how we do and in that individual way, I don't think there's an additional cost as such. I mean, obviously I do probably need to point out that Housing 21, you know, financially has put forward that money for investment, so they have committed to the asset management team that, you know, we will meet a certain standard with our properties, which is way above decent homes. So, you know, from that perspective, we're very fortunate that we've got that budget available to spend on the properties. And obviously we look at life cycles, we look at when the makeovers are due. You know, when we're going to do a refurbishment, my team will go and have a little look at it, speak to the staff, and in some cases we can extend it. We don't have to do it as often if it's been looked after. Or, you know, conversely, we have extra care schemes that have lots of day centres run from them, 3 meals a day in the restaurant, lots of residents with physical impairments. So, you know, you've got the classical kind of Zimmer frame marks along the wall and plaster chunks missing. So I guess it's really, for us, it's each scheme gets assessed on its own merits. But yes, we are very lucky that budget wise, you know, the budget covers what we need to do. But we're quite thrifty. You know, I'm an absolute bargain hunter.
But in the end, it's a business decision, isn't it? What is best for Housing 21 is for people to enable them to maintain their tenure. And that means staying as long as possible in the home that you've built for them. And I suppose my argument to commissioners who have to apply this sort of policies in the community is that actually there's a real investment, there's an investment opportunity to enable people to live in their own homes for as long as possible, because the alternative is inevitably residential care or hospital, which is what Yasmin outlined. And I suppose for me that is the interesting fact about this, that it's both consultative and actually good value for money. So it's really fascinating. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? Oh, there's a few. I can see some.
Yeah, let's have a
switch. So
go back now. I'm not sure how many's on here.
so people have also posted questions in the question and answer sessions. So
the others didn't get asked this much. That's fine. Where do you want to start?
But can you see the 4 question and answers?
Sorry, my screen.
Let's start with Simon. He's an old friend. For starters, he said, very interesting. Do you feel there's a balance to achieve between the design for dementia and design that works for other residents, or are all the same thing? It's good design is inclusive.
Yeah, I think actually having good design that is also dementia friendly, to the untrained eye, they wouldn't even notice. And that's the beauty of what we do. I think, you know, we don't go as far as to have yellow toilet doors with big pictures of toilets on them. That was a kind of conscious decision at our exec team level. We didn't feel we needed to go that far. But then we've done other things like signage that is suitable for people with dementia. But it's got more of a subtle nod to things like pointing people in the right direction for certain rooms and services that they might need. So I think actually, yeah, to answer that question, then yeah, I think we do have a bit of a mixture, but I don't think anybody that didn't have dementia would feel like they were in an institute, because the way the design works, it's really modern and contemporary. But it's those kind of quick wins, isn't it? Colour contrast, comfortable, practical furniture. You know, a lot of the fabrics that we use now in our restaurants, they're waterproof, but you'd never know it. So it's just some of those choices that you can make. You make the right choices and they save you money further down the line, but they're also practical for people with dementia or with other kind of ailments and things anyway. So I think we've got a really good balance there.
No, and I think that we who deliver services in the community have to learn from that, because actually the stuff that we put in older and disabled people's houses, whether it's for dementia or not, it's highly medicalized. It is chased in terms of the design function. It is chased down to the bottom, where we have white handrails and quite hospitalized level access showers. And actually it needn't be like that. All the manufacturers, all the contractors say actually good design costs no more than the stuff that we're putting in. So
absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Sorry. I was just going to say, you know, within our specification for new build now, working with Motion Spot, and if anybody wants to look them up on the web, you know, they're really contemporary bathrooms, but they're practical, and we're going down that road now. So we've moved away from white grab rails. We're going more for the chrome look, but ones where you can have caps, so that if somebody doesn't need those grab rails, they can be taken off and just a cap going over them. But then if somebody moves in consequently that does need it, you can just fix it up.
So I am aware you're working with Motion Spot, and
Yeah.
we've had Motion Spot on in some of these webinars before. So it's for those of you who don't know it, Google Motion Spot, and it's great design solutions. Alison has asked, and it's funny how we're all motivated by COVID at the moment. I wonder why. Are your communal areas and lounges open at the moment in your extra care schemes, or is everybody locked up in their own little units?
What we've done well, it depends what tier they were in previously. I mean, we have had some schemes that have had COVID cases, so the whole scheme's been locked down. So where it's been safe to do so, we did allow social distanced use of the communal spaces. So in the lounge areas, we allowed residents to sit, but only in small groups, and we've introduced things like face coverings and good practice like that. So we've spaced out chairs so people don't sit next to each other. We've stuffed some of the chairs in the corner so they're out the way. And then doing the more serious cases, obviously we still provide a meal service, but it was delivered to the residents' home. So I think, again, a bit of an individual approach, really depending on what tier the courts have been in and whether there've been actual cases, you know, with staff and or residents.
Okay, I mean, it's just a selfish point of view, really. There's a lot of attention being paid to people visiting care and extra care homes at the moment for people living with dementia, because they haven't seen each other for months. Are you able to unlock some of that through the new guidance, or this is not germane to this webinar, but it's quite newsworthy at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's where probably some of the ideas that we've got in our design guide will come into their own, really. So I think bringing the outdoors in, so if people can't go outside, can they see a breakout area where they can sit and have a reflection, or, you know, just read a book, or just catch somebody that's walking past? But that's where I think us improving the outside spaces as well will be key. And I know I've got a lot of feedback from residents where they were limited during the sort of summer lockdown, but were able to go and get a breath of fresh air in the garden, just sit on a garden bench and talk to one of their neighbours from a bigger distance than 2 meters. But I think that made a massive difference to some of our residents' well-being during that time when it was, you know, really uncertain and they couldn't see their own family members, but at least they could have a brief chat with their neighbour just to ask how they were. So I think, yeah, that's really key to us. I think, you know, with the design guide, we kind of covered that off anyway, but I think in this current climate, more than ever, it's a really...
No, I think good design comes into its own in a crisis. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, thank you so much.
I put my email in if anybody did want to contact me about anything else. So hopefully you've got that, because I don't think I had it on the slide, so apologies.
So anybody who wants to contact any of the panelists, you can do so through foundations. Some of them were on the slides, but if you're uncertain, do email us and we will forward emails to Heidi, Marnie and Shirley. Heidi, Marnie, Shirley and Yasmin, thank you so much for presenting this afternoon. It's been fascinating. I like the way they all end up talking to each other, despite having come in from very different directions, these presentations. The next webinar on dementia and design will be on the 16th of on the 16th of December. I believe that Paul Smith will close with some of our events. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Just for those who haven't been to one of our events before, we do have a DFG Champions Facebook group. We've got 1,200 people from across the country, OTs, housing managers, technical officers, caseworkers who have regular conversations about dementia and all sorts of other DFG related topics. If you'd like to join, it's a private group for professionals only. You can join at facebook.com/group/DFG Champions. And if you work for or with a home improvement agency, and Yasmin mentioned earlier, kind of a deficit of training, we do have lots of online courses available. So if you've got a little bit of time between now and Christmas, or even in the new year, perhaps you have to work over Christmas, there's lots of these courses are available totally free of charge. Each of them lasts somewhere between half an hour and an hour. There's one on dementia awareness somewhere in there, but all sorts of bits and pieces. So if you're interested in those, please please get in touch with Foundations. If you manage a home improvement agency, we give you a login, and then you can enroll all your staff on as many courses as you like. All free of charge, thanks to continued support of Taylor Wimpey for our charity Foundations Independent Living Trust. So thank you all for coming. Good to have a good turnout. As I mentioned earlier, we've got the virtual DFG Champions Roadshow next Tuesday, and the National Healthy Housing Awards next Tuesday afternoon. All free to attend. Be great to see you there. You can just sit and watch as you've done today, but you can also chat to each other, pull up a chair at a virtual table, do some speed networking, or visit one of our exhibitors. So if you've missed out on visiting exhibitors and finding out all about the latest in adaptations equipment, you can do that next Tuesday. And we've also got another webinar later in December on home adaptations for children in particular. So, and then lots more stuff in the new year. So thank you all for coming today. I'm going to wrap up now, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel later in the week. So thank you, Francis. Thank you to all our speakers, and hope to see you again soon.